All right, folks. Sorry, there's some technical problem at the start. It appears there's some kind of delay with video transmission that kind of causes the delay with the actual start of this broadcast. So it's now about 4 minutes past noon in the US and Canada Eastern Time Zone, 9 on the West Coast, 10 Mountain Time, 11 Central, 2 in the afternoon, Brazilian time. Thank you, Brazilian fans. I know some of you are watching. 1700 UTC. That's a number you can use to translate into any time zone. This is also the UK time this time of the year. 1100 in Central Europe, and finally 10:30 p.m. in India. Thank you very much for staying so late for my musings. Our main topic for today, rather the title I chose for today's episode, is lead time in plain English. I just reluctantly use two words that make a term that you'd find in the glossary section of a book on process improvement. I want to think about it today, not as a methodological term, but as something we actually experience in our lives, especially when we act as customers, increasingly often actually, as the year-end holidays approach. Then I want to go back to our high-tech workplace with a better grasp of the time element, of the tempo and the rhythm of our business. Before we begin, several reminders and announcements. Well, folks, first, this isn't a webinar. I'll be showing things on the screen from time to time, but I don't want you to feel attached to it. I don't want you to feel pressure to follow closely, slide by slide. Don't worry if you miss anything. Do what you'd normally do at this hour, depending on where you are, or whether you're watching this live or as a recording, getting lunch maybe, or coffee or snack, taking break between meetings or other stressful activities at work. No worries about mute unmute, and no debilitating black boxes of Zoom. As you can tell, I face demons of different kind in this medium. Please post in the live chat where you're listening or watching from. This means a lot to me and energizes me during this hour and as I prepare for the next one. Please do ask questions on today's topic or any other. Post in the chat or comments or pretty much anywhere you can connect with me. The answers may be useful to more people than just you. I can give shorter answers here. Well, actually, it can depend on the timing and the flow of today's show. A good question-answer pairing could be a topic I could expand in a future episode, or perhaps write an article about it. We'll finish as usual at the 55-minute mark. Whatever you have planned next at the next hour, especially at work, you'll have some time for changeover. Folks, some important announcements. So there is a Kanban TO event coming up next week. Kanban TO is a somewhat Toronto-centric Kanban method community in Canada. And next week we'll have a great guest speaker, Mike Buller, joining us from British Columbia. Mike will present on his tool for pulling some good data and metrics out of some work management tools that a lot of people dislike. There will also be some community discussion facilitated by our Kanban expert, Fernando Cuenca. This is at 7 p.m. Local time in Toronto, and of course virtually as well. Folks, also, somebody read my mind, and next Wednesday, November 20th, the Toronto Agile community is having this virtual event, and they decided, okay, well, we invited Todd to keynote our conference 5 years ago, and he spoke on this very topic. And how about we invite him again 5 years later? So Todd Sharon will give a speech, and he will tell us what he learned in the last 5 years. So this promises to be quite useful. Folks, maybe one more kind of procedural announcement. Also, I know there is a Kanban leadership retreat going on in Miami right now, and some Kanban people are there for sure. People exploring something about how we manage the flow of work, right? So I hope none of them are watching at this minute, because they should be in some important session. However, maybe watching this on the recording in the afternoon would be all right. Speaking of which, folks, I usually rewatch these videos right after they finish, and I annotate them with timestamps. So this should be done and the video updated on YouTube at maybe by 3 p.m. Eastern Time today. So at that moment, you can watch it and click on the timestamp and immediately go to some topic or some interesting part of this show that is really of interest to you, and you can skip over some of the other stuff that you're less interested in. So after 3 p.m., recording will be perhaps a better watching experience than immediately after the show. Unless, of course, you're watching it live. Thank you very much for that. So, folks, now about the main topic. So, time in very simple kind of layman's terms. The holidays are approaching, and so a lot of us buy gifts for loved ones, and we want them to arrive on time before New Year's or Christmas or whatever holiday you're celebrating. And quite often, let's say if you go to a store and you have to, let's say, order it, or you go to an online store like Amazon or any other, they typically give you some estimate when it will arrive. Let's say they estimate shipping time 3 to 10 days. Or Amazon can even give you precise timing, order on this day by this hour, and we guarantee that your item will be at your home by Christmas. So you get this idea of how much lead time do you need before you actually need the item. And businesses who try to serve you also have this sort of idea, and they kind of try to fit your purpose and your schedule, so you have an opportunity to choose your item and order it on time to get it on time. Some time ago, it was, I think, about 20 years ago, I joined an internet advertising startup. And it was towards the end of the year, I think it was November-ish or so. So the holiday season was already starting, perhaps approaching. Our founder and CEO said something to new hires that he hoped they could make some contribution to the company's bottom line even before that year's holiday shopping season was over. So that sounded a bit overly optimistic, but not for the reason I would, you'd think immediately. After the New Year's holidays, I got a chance to see some of our data, some of our business data. Actually, those were quite technical data because they were compiled from our server logs. Things like page views, active users, ad impressions, clicks, conversions, and so on. And I noticed some very interesting patterns in the data. So first of all, we had a certain weekly cycle. People actually spent more time in front of computer screens, even for non-work related reasons, during the weekdays and less on weekends. So there was certainly a weekly up and down pattern. And also, even adjusting for that pattern, for the weekly pattern, and the annual year-on-year growth, there was a certain seasonal peak, and of course it happened during the holiday shopping season. But I underestimated how early that peak actually occurred during the season. I thought it would happen maybe around December 20th, as people did some last-minute Christmas shopping and maybe even shopping between Christmas and New Year's, because those were the busiest times at brick-and-mortar stores. I was surprised to find out that the peak actually occurred around December 9th or 10th, and then there was a pretty significant decline lasting all the way into early January, and only then it would start climbing back up to reach the next year's peak. So it turns out that people had some notion of how much lead time do I need to do all this stuff online so that I can be all set for the holidays. And that time was a bit longer than you would think. And that was an important takeaway for us as a business. All right, let's think about another kind of holiday-related activity. You miss your friends that you haven't met in person recently, and you want to go out with them and celebrate before the year end. So you want to find a day that works for everyone. And let's say you started looking for such a day in December. And then soon you find out that there's really no day that works for everyone, because everyone's family schedule is already busy. It gets busy like this. Some people even go out of town. Some people have to drive kids to various activities and so on and so forth. Meet with their relatives and whatnot. And you realize you started too late. And let's say we learned the lesson and we start looking for such a day in November. And okay, well, we actually did find a day that works for everyone, and let's say it happens in early December. Now, we want to go out to our favorite restaurant, so we call that restaurant a few days in advance, and unfortunately, they don't have any tables available because we're not alone who wanted to celebrate this way. A lot of people had the same idea. And so, once again, it's too late. It's either next year or TGI Fridays. So, once again, we get an idea that we have to start a bit early because we need more lead time to accomplish something before the day when we need it, right? And actually finding such day is actually quite variable. It's entirely possible that actually the next day works for, like tomorrow works for everyone. And the restaurant isn't having their busiest day. But it's also possible that you look at your friends look at their calendars, and it turns out that you don't have such a day for the next 3 or 4 weeks. So there's a lot of variation involved in like when that day might actually be. And let's consider one more example from our kind of daily lives. So here's a birthday cake. Now, we have our favorite baker that we usually get cakes for various important occasions from. And it's a fantastic local business on west side of Toronto. Here's the thing. The baker usually takes orders about a week in advance. And she often posts on various social media channels where you can follow her that, let's say, well, today is November 12th, she's no longer taking orders, let's say, through November 20th. So if you need your cake on the 21st, that's fine, you can call and place your order today, but as far as all the days up to the 20th, that's fully booked. And so customers typically know this, and they request their cake in advance. This usually kind of fits their purpose and fitness criteria as well, because if the date is really important, you will probably want to take care of this not at the last moment, but maybe a week or two in advance. What's interesting about this cake business and how it's different from some of the previous examples we considered, unlike, let's say, the shipping time from your online retailer, which has some natural variation, let's say 3 to 10 days, right? So some variation in this shipping process. And unlike the high variability of, let's say, people's schedules, finding a day that works for everyone, the cake production process is pretty deterministic. It takes several hours. So you basically work with the ingredients and you put them in the oven, then you take them out of the oven at a fairly predictable time, then it cools down, there's a little bit of time for decorations, and it's ready. So it's not like it's gonna take between 3 and 10 days to do. It will be done in a pretty fixed number of hours. But there is this also human element of it that adds some variation, and you may need to perhaps add about a week to that time, because otherwise the slot in the oven that where your cake is supposed to go, that will be taken by someone else's cake. Folks, I think this should be enough of various examples of like holiday shopping and cakes and whatnot. And I'm about to go into our more high-tech workplace and see how this time element, the lead time, when do we need it? When should we start, or when should we order? How much time separates these two moments? One of them leads or precedes another by this much. But it's 21 minutes into, and I'd like to kind of pause a little bit and maybe ask you to ask some questions, maybe some comments, maybe let's actually have a look at the chat where you're watching this from, any messages posted there. All right, Austin, Texas, thank you very much. All right, and I'd also like to, perhaps I forgot one of the procedural things at the start. Tomorrow morning, let's say first half of the day, I'll be announcing the topic for the next episode 4, that will occur at the usual time, next Tuesday. There's some good contenders for that topic. One of them will have to go first and the other one later, and I'm still sort of undecided, and maybe I'll make up my mind this afternoon. So please monitor some social media channels. I think I'll make a posting on this channel as well, and also on LinkedIn. And of course, I hope to see you next Tuesday. So let's consider something in a very different domain, but this may be close to where we work. So let's just make sure this is in, all right, like this. All right, folks, let's go into in a more kind of high-tech environment where, let's say you lead a team of people working there, or maybe you somehow interact with a team that makes some kind of technology solution, and you may have heard them in the last 10 years to use words like DevOps, DORA metrics. DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment. That's basically kind of an industry group that kind of maintains all knowledge about DevOps practices. And so there is this notion of lead time. So lead time is one of the so-called DORA metrics. What does it mean, and how does it compare to what we just saw in our daily lives? Well, lead time is, again, time between two moments. The moment when we want to see our code in production, and the last moment when we actually have to commit a change to that code. All right, so the push to production doesn't happen instantly. There is some time gap, and that's lead time. One of these moments leads or precedes another by this much. So what happens in between? Well, what happens in between, I just need to kind of get rid of this, something I just hid. Well, it's a deployment pipeline. So what's deployment pipeline for those who may not necessarily be familiar with this type of work? Well, that's when, let's say, you make some change to the code, to your technical solution, and then the deployment pipeline goes to work. This is basically all work done by computers, right? So they compile the source code, they make up all the necessary configuration files, it pushes everything into, let's say, test environment, runs a bunch of automated tests. Now, if any of these tests fails, the pipeline stops. That's it. You cannot push that change to production. However, if all tests are green, if they all pass, then there's perhaps more tests in a different testing environment, different kinds of tests. There's usually several layers of tests, each serving different purpose. They run in different environments. They test the system from different angles, so the different testing strategies that the teams and companies can employ. That's kind of details of your deployment pipeline implementation. But eventually, your technical solution moves to some staging environment, pre-production environment, and ultimately to production. And all of this work is largely automated, done by computers, and it takes a certain amount of time. How long? Well, according to DORA, and they kind of give some guidance what constitutes, let's say, elite performance, what is, let's say, good performance, what is kind of middling or poor. So if your company is an elite performer by this metric, this would take on the order of hours. So all your automated tests, there's sufficiently fast infrastructure to run everything during that time, and your code is in production. So this is kind of reminds me of kind of that cake that takes maybe a couple of hours to bake, right? And the work is done by the machine, by the oven. But then I remember there is some human element to it. So let's explore this element. But before, I want to ask you, did some of you ever wonder if, let's say, in your company where you work, people use DevOps, and some people also use, let's say, Kanban. Is there any connection between the two? Are these things mutually exclusive? Do you use one or the other? Do you use them both, and how? So, folks, it's actually very simple, and actually, let's just say, just for the sake of it, we decided to design a Kanban system around this service, this continuous deployment pipeline. So from here to there, right? It is a service, right? You can give it something such as your code change, it can do the work, and it can produce a result, code in production, right? So it is a service. We can design a Kanban system around the service. So what turns out that this DORA lead time is precisely the system lead time of this Kanban system. So it's pretty much the same thing. If you design a Kanban system, every Kanban system has a lead time, the time between start and finish, we promise, and here it is. And in this case, the Kanban system lead time matches this DORA lead time precisely. However, what this Kanban system design can also reveal to us is that there is actually something else. When you design a Kanban system, you also kind of reveal who its customers are. And the customers are your product development teams. So they all use this deployment pipeline. They send it their changes, then it does some work for them, and here's the result, your code in production. Now, I intentionally simplified and didn't really display any process how those product teams work. I only mean to say there are usually several of them, and all of them have some potential. Well, this is their job. They basically make some changes to the system, and they need to push those changes to production. And so there is some shared infrastructure that they can all use to push those changes to production. So it is effectively a shared service serving multiple internal customers in your company. And of course, we would identify all such customers when designing a Kanban system. And sometimes coordinating these multiple customers, and also let's not forget we have customers outside the company, right? So the customers who will actually be using our product or products. So some kind of coordination is needed. And what companies often did in the past, they had a so-called change advisory board meeting. So let's say if your team has finished some product feature and you want to push it to production, well, you come to, let's say, a weekly change advisory board or CAB meeting with your proposed change, and then the CAB decides. They will grant you permission to push it to production, in which case you get your time slot in the schedule when you can do it. And there will be some kind of plan, who will be the engineer actually doing this, who should be on call just in case something goes wrong in production, and if you need to roll back the change, who will be on it. So such plan must be made. Or let's say a CAB can decide that your change isn't really ready for prime time yet, in which case they will ask you to come back later, and so your request will not be accepted at this time. So let's say if we had, let's say, a couple of hours of lead time to run our pipeline, right? And let's say that's the only thing. And we wanted to push our change to production, let's say by 3 p.m. tomorrow, on Wednesday. Then we could make our last commit by 1 p.m. tomorrow, right? So we have until then. But let's say in a more complicated scenario that includes this kind of human element, that includes, let's say, a change advisory board, that includes coordination of multiple teams, when is your CAB meeting? Let's say it happens on Thursdays. Well, that means we're kind of already out of luck to push our change on Wednesday, because we should have brought it in, to last Thursday's meeting, right? So from last Thursday to this Wednesday, it's about six days, right? So that's how long it's gonna take to actually move it to production. And what if we were actually ready not exactly last Thursday, but let's say the previous Wednesday, right? So it adds still a few days. And now this actually starts resembling that cake problem, right? So yes, the time to bake it is very deterministic, right? It's only maybe a couple of hours. but how you actually coordinate the time when that baking will actually occurs adds a few days to it. Right, so now looking at this and how teams in your company, even if you are not really familiar with the inner workings of your company's technology, this should be like a piece of cake, right? Folks, an interesting conversation occurred once between me and one of my clients. I knew they were making some great progress, actually shortening those lead times and making their deployments faster and more frequent. And so I asked them, okay, folks, you no longer have your change advisory board meetings as you used to weekly. And we say, Alexei, of course not, right? We implemented continuous deployment, so we just basically just push it to production, and that's it. And he said, okay, well, if you have such a continuous pipeline, then do you use feature toggles? And I said, what? No, of course we use feature toggles. So for those uninitiated, so feature toggles is basically a way for you to kind of ship the new version of your technology, but the new feature is kind of turned off. So the code is already inside it, but it isn't really working because there's like a switch that inside your product that turns off just the new feature. And then at a later moment, you can just flip that switch on. You don't really need to ship anything anymore. And now it starts working, and now it's suddenly available and visible to all your customers. So such a technique is known as a feature toggle. So I asked the person at this client company, so if you have feature toggles, do you ship with toggles on or off? Well, of course we ship with toggles off. And now comes the punchline. I ask them, how do you decide and when do you decide to switch, to toggle the toggles on? And he says, oh, well, actually, we've got a new weekly meeting for that. So it turns out that even when you fully automate this pipeline, there is still something to talk about with your customers, perhaps with multiple teams that still need some coordination, to choose the right moment when you say, here it is, and the customer can take it away from you. Folks, another interesting issue here, of course, is that perhaps these two moments, commit and in production, aren't the only moments we're interested in. We may also be interested in, well, what about time from here to here? From the very start of the product development process and all the way to production, right? Or perhaps all the way to commit, depending on which moment is important to you. Right? So for example, you want some product update, some new technology available for, let's say, late November, the start of the holiday shopping season. Well, if you only start developing this kind of solution, doing some kind of analysis, developing some kind of technical solution, testing it, then you won't be able to commit it tomorrow, and you won't be able to push it into production day after tomorrow, right? You have to start earlier. And how long will that take? And that is called lead time too. So the DORA lead time is not the only lead time that you have in your perhaps technology process or in your business. There is also time you can define as, okay, when do we want to have some sort of solution, some sort of product in the market? And you can walk backwards to, okay, how much lead time do we need for that? When should we start actually building or developing, putting together this kind of solution that we will eventually ship? And this is one of the reasons why we design Kanban systems. because they allow us this end-to-end view of, of, of the process from some idea or promise that we make to a customer, and then we then all the way to the moment when we actually, like, here it is, deliver it to customers. Folks, the lead time metric, now I'm intentionally avoiding the topic of, okay, well, how do we visualize it? How do we compile all various charts? How we read the charts and whatnot? Because first and foremost, I believe it's important to just talk about the concept of a time gap between two important moments when you see some kind of outcome, some result of your work, and the time when you actually need to start, when you need to make some kind of decision. And the time in between, you cannot just compress it, right? It takes a certain amount of time, there's some duration to it. There may be sometimes significant variation to it, as we saw, for example, in the friend's dinner example, right? Or perhaps in the product development example. Do you know how long it will take? Maybe a month, maybe 2, maybe 3. Just having some intuitive feel for how long it is and how unpredictable it is, so that we can make better decisions in the future. I also don't want to get very much into, let's say, a methodological debate about where to measure this time metric from and to. When do we start counting lead time and when do we stop counting it? Because what matters is, like, when do you need it and when you should start. A good test, whether you're measuring or whether you are observing this time from the right moment to the right moment, is when did these moments occur in the past? Let's say you shipped something to your customer on time, they got it on time, and you started it on time, and it took this much, right? So we want this metric to inform our decisions, no matter how quantitatively, qualitatively, intuitively we perceive this metric, right? We want it to be helpful for us to decide, to act. And so we need it at the moment when we need to act or decide, but then we need to measure this metric from, or observe it, from a similar moment in the past when we act in a similar fashion or made a similar decision. And that's basically the essence of this metric. Folks, I would like to say maybe like a few words to some of the people in certain roles that I know are listening or watching to this. So if, let's say, you are a leader of one of these product teams, and so you kind of work over here. So let's say this is where you are. Let's say over here in this area. Then you're kind of in a dual position, because on one hand you are a customer to one of the services, which is your deployment pipeline, right? And you know how fast it can do something for you. So, and there's some technical time, which is the DORA lead time metric, and perhaps if you design a Kanban system around that service, you can also get the full time, which also includes some human and organizational component, which can be quite variable. And at the same time, your product development team has customers, such as, well, let's say some markets, some stakeholders, perhaps some actual customers for whom you are developing your technical solution, right? And those customers have some lead time expectation too. So again, by observing those expectations, by observing your own delivery to those customers, by noticing these moments when you decided to act, when you started some work, and when you finished it, when you gave it to your customer, you can start developing a pretty good feel for what lead time is in your process. If you, let's say you are a manager who oversees a group of such teams, a question I get quite often: should we compare our teams on, let's say, this lead time metric? And I would say, from what we discussed today, it appears that that might not be a very wise way to go about it, because effectively these teams are customers, right? And you're basically trying to compare them by the performance of their vendor, so to speak, right? The performance of a service to which they are customers, right? This is a shared service, right? So what a good metric would be is something that improves the performance of a shared service, and if it improves, it helps all of your teams, right? However, comparing teams based on what kind of performance out of another service they received as customers doesn't really make much sense. Also, for example, the time that it takes you to run the deployment pipeline may, for example, increase tomorrow. Why? Because one of the teams added a lot of automated tests. Or maybe the platform team decided to run the integration tests on a much larger data set, and it takes extra time to migrate it to the testing environment. So the pipeline time is a little bit longer, right? So now some team experiences, let's say, a longer lead time from deployment pipeline. Are they a worse team nowadays? No, actually, perhaps the quality of your products across all teams has just gone up, right? Whereas some metric kind of is showing allegedly performance that's worse off, right? So so such straightforward comparisons usually will not work. If you are, let's say, a senior manager overseeing the work of, let's say, several product groups and several shared services and potentially some vendors that these product development groups may depend on, actually some simple visualizations showing how all these groups and teams and, let's say, some shared infrastructure are all connected to each other, and how and where you find the time element in this picture. Again, one moment leads or precedes the other by this much. This can really radically increase transparency of what your, let's say, organization does. And folks, one more thing, and I will proceed to conclusion, is it's about kind of the seasonal rhythm of our business. I gave some examples out of mostly retail industry during this hour. Retail industry operates on a very, let's say, cyclical annual pattern. So there is end of year shopping season, and then there will be some summer vacation season. There may be some spring cleaning and Mother's Day, Father's Day in the spring, back to school in the fall. And let's say you have some business strategy how you want to compete in this market. And you need some kind of technology support. You need some technical solutions to help you execute this strategy in the market. Now let's say if the lead time of your technology group, from, let's say, when you request some technical solution from them to the time they actually, you can actually have it in the market. Let's say it's 6 months plus minus 3. Well, this isn't great, because you basically have to, what is it? It's November now. You're basically preparing for next year's back to school, right? You have to act now to be ready then. It's a very long time, and your decision doesn't benefit from, let's say, some kind of retrospective on how this holiday season went, let alone, let's say, next spring's Mother's and Father's Days, right? So this is not a particularly good amount of agility, because you have to guess what the market will be like and what the customers will want 6 or 9 months from now. On the other hand, if your technology group has a much more compact lead time capability, let's say 1 to 2 months, or even weeks, then you don't have to start, let's say, back to school work just yet. You can work on your spring promotions, you can and maybe only start getting ready for back to school over the summer, because you will still have enough lead time. And in that case, whatever your business strategy is and whatever tactics you use for the year, that shorter lead time allows your business to make several very nimble tactical moves. And if your competitor still has a much longer lead time, well, you can run circles around them. Folks, I've been talking about this for about 50 minutes. So let's just check if there's some interesting questions and comments. So there's an awesome comment. In most companies I have worked with, they focus on continuous delivery, which requires both DevOps and flow management with Kanban. So yes, thank you very much. This is a fantastic comment from one of our listeners and watchers, that it's not either or, is that you use both, right? So you Kanbanize the entire process end to end. You can Kanbanize every little service that your end-to-end process depends on, and that may even include your, let's say, DevOps infrastructure, DevOps group, and your deployment pipeline, and whatever human element and customer interaction element exists around it. And each of these Kanbanized services will have its lead time. It's a metric informing, again, when you have to act in order to get some kind of results on time. So, folks, thank you all very much for watching and listening. See you next Tuesday at the same time. Please watch out for some announcements of next week's topic that will be coming up shortly. I will make up my mind shortly. And I intend, of course, to update this video with the timestamps of all the relevant parts of it for the ease of watching the recording. And also post some kind of summary of what was said here today. Thank you very much, and till next week.